recognized.
Suspend.
Without objection.
I support Senator McCain's amendment, and that amendment would allow drug importation from approved pharmacies in Canada. I've been a long-time proponent of safe drug importation. I'm currently a co-sponsor of a Pharmaceutical Market Access and Drug Safety Act, a bill that I've worked on many years with Senator Snowe and Senator McCain. In 2002 and 2003, I supported amendments similar to the one before us today that would permit importation of prescription drugs from Canada. In the year 2004, the late Senator Kennedy and I worked together on a bill that would authorize drug importation, but it did not survive the partisan politics of this chamber. I then introduced my own comprehensive drug importation bill in 2004. I entitled that bill "The Reliable Entry of Medicine and Everyday Discounts Through the Importation of Effective Safeguard Act," and that naturally works out to an acronym, and we called it the Remedies Act. In 2005, I combined that bill with a proposal sponsored by then Senator Dorgan and now Senator Snowe, and in 2007 and 2009 we reintroduced a version of that legislation with hopes that our combined effort would finally lower the cost of prescription drugs for all Americans. During the health care reform debate in 2009, drug importation had a much better chance to pass than ever before. We had a Democratic supermajority in Congress, and we had a Democratic president who supported drug importation in the past. But in backroom deals between the Obama White House and the pharmaceutical industry, those deals prevented us from finally lowering the drug costs for all Americans. So, after all these decades and a half of effort, we're back here again, trying to accomplish the same goal with Senator McCain's amendment. I have always considered drug importation a free trade issue. Imports create competition and keep domestic industry more responsive to consumers. Consumers in the United States pay far more for prescription drugs than those in other countries. For instance, U.S. prices are on average 52.5% higher than Canadian pharmacy prices. If Americans could legally and safely access prescription drugs outside the United States, then drug companies would be forced to reevaluate their pricing strategies. They'd no longer be able to gouge American consumers by making them pay more than their fair share for the high cost of research and development, because that's a fact. We pay for most of the research and development of new drugs because other countries are getting by dirt cheap, and there's not enough money coming in from those countries to pay for all the research that it takes. Because, you know, most of the cost of a drug is the research and the development. It's not the manufacture of that little pill, or a big pill for that matter. In the United States, it's a fact. We import everything consumers want. So why not pharmaceuticals? In fact, I look back at all my years working on trying to free up trade around the world through efforts to pass free trade agreements, through efforts to get the President Trade Promotion Authority, everything that would make global prices available to American consumers. And I can only think of two things that our law prevents consumers in America buying from other countries, when everything else that consumers buy, they can buy it anywhere in the world if they want to, but not for pharmaceuticals or not for Cuban cigars. Some opponents of this amendment have concerns about what drug importation would mean for the safety of drugs. And obviously, we got to be concerned about drug safety, because that's what the FDA is all about. Two things: making sure drugs are safe. Number two, to make sure that they're effective. Everyone who knows me knows that I care deeply about the safety of drugs. And I would not be standing here today urging support for McCain's amendment if I didn't think it would properly protect the safety of the nation's prescription drug supply chain. The fact of the matter is that the unsafe situation is what we have today. Today, patients who need a cheaper alternative are ordering drugs over the Internet from who knows where, and the FDA does not have the resources to do much of anything about it. The fact is that the McCain amendment would not only help to lower the cost of prescription drugs for all Americans, but will also establish a system where American patients can be certain that the drugs they are importing are safe. The amendment has requirements that a pharmacy must meet before the Secretary may approve them for participation. This includes product testing in labs designated by the Secretary. A list of approved pharmacies will be published on the FDA website. Patients who are already forced to purchase their medications outside the United States would be able to access the list to choose a safe option. Additionally, the amendment lays out criteria that must be met before a patient may import drugs from an FDA-approved pharmacy. Patients must have a valid prescription from a physician licensed to practice in our country. The purchase must be for personal use, and the drug must have the same active ingredient, route of administration, dosage form, and strength as prescription drugs approved by the Secretary of HHS. The McCain amendment would improve drug safety. It would not threaten drug safety, and it would open up trade to lower-cost drugs, and it would make other consumers around the world to start paying for some of the research and development that the American consumer is paying such a high price to provide for. We should do all we can to get miracle drugs originated and developed, but the American consumer shouldn't be paying the entire bill. We need to make sure that Americans have even greater, more affordable access to life-saving drugs by opening the doors to competition in the global pharmaceutical industry. So obviously, after a decade and a half, I'm continuing to urge my colleagues to join in this effort on the importation of drugs, and in this particular year, to give support to Senator McCain, support his amendment, and applaud him for the leadership that he's shown in this area over a long period of time. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming is recognized.
President, I rise in opposition to the McCain Amendment, number 2107, which would facilitate the importation of prescription drugs from Canada. We're not talking about bus trips of seniors to reputable brick-and-mortar pharmacies right across the border. We're talking about Canadian Internet pharmacies, which may not even be in Canada, which pose a significant threat to American patient safety. This amendment would require the Food and Drug Administration to allow individuals to import prescription drugs into the United States from Canada, notwithstanding any other provision of the Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act. Drugs that supposedly come from Canada can originate in any country in the world and merely be shipped to the United States from Canada. Canadian law does not prohibit shipment of drugs from any country into Canada and then into the United States. They don't care. In 2005, FDA conducted an investigation of drugs that American patients thought they were ordering from Canada. 85% of the drugs represented as coming from Canada actually came from 27 other countries. A number of drugs were found to be counterfeit. A letter from Assistant Deputy Minister of Health Canada to the U.S. Surgeon General said that Canada does not assure that products being sold to U.S. citizens are safe, effective, and of high quality, and does not intend to do so in the future. The pending amendment would allow importation from Canadian Internet pharmacies. Canadian Internet pharmacies openly acknowledge that they obtain most of their drugs from other countries. The specific language of the pending amendment gives rise to the additional safety concerns. For example, it will not prevent the importation of drugs that need special handling, such as refrigerated or photosensitive drugs. It would not prevent the importation of special drugs, such as those inhaled during surgery or administered intravenously. The pending amendment would not require Canadian wholesalers that would be involved in importation to be licensed or registered in any way. There'd be a list, but not a licensing or a registration. Do we really want anyone, even someone under investigation or with a suspended or revoked license, to be in the business of importing drugs, given the well-known risks? FDA advises consumers that some imported drugs, including those that bear the name of U.S.-approved product, may in fact be counterfeit versions that are unsafe or completely ineffective. You know, it can have all the ingredients to it, but if it isn't put together the right way, it won't even dissolve as it goes through the body, and therefore there would be no benefit from that drug, even though it looked like the real thing, it tasted like the real thing, it went down just like the real thing. But if it's not the real thing, it can cause some real trouble with people's health. This is not a hypothetical concern. Last year, Homeland Security Secretary Napolitano testified that counterfeit drugs are a growing problem. 2 months ago, FDA testified about the dangers of purchasing counterfeit, unapproved, or diverted prescription drugs online. My colleague, Senator Mikulski, has highlighted the growing involvement of organized crime in this area. Prescription drug counterfeiting can be dramatically more profitable than narcotics smuggling. Imported drugs pose additional dangers because their labels may lack important information or warning. FDA advises consumers that an imported medication may lack information allowing patients to be promptly and correctly treated for dangerous side effects. We know that imported drugs pose severe risk to American patients. The Food and Drug Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services has repeatedly said they cannot assure the safety of imported drugs. A side-by-side, an amendment that we used to put on this all the time was that you could import the drugs as long as the Secretary of Health and Human Services said that it was safe. There hasn't been a Secretary of Health and Human Services that's been willing to sign that drugs imported from anywhere, even Canada, are safe. FDA's website advises consumers that imported drugs, including drugs imported from Canada, may not have been manufactured under quality assurance procedures designed to produce a safe and effective product. That's the FDA website. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act represents over 100 years of lawmaking to protect public health. It gives the Food and Drug Administration authority to make sure drugs are properly approved, manufactured, labeled, shipped, handled, and stored, that factories are inspected, and that numerous other protections are in place for American patients. Adopting this amendment would endanger American patients, and I would therefore urge my colleagues to oppose it. There's a lot more that could be said on this. I've been studying this for years, trying to find a way that it could be done. But at the present time, the safety of it makes me oppose this particular amendment. They keep revising the amendment. It's still online, and everybody knows how online can be redone. They talked about putting an official seal on each website, but I know fourth graders that in 20 seconds can duplicate any seal you can put on the Internet. Any lists can be changed, and who checks the lists anyway? The problem is not knowing where the drugs really come from that go through Canada to the United States. And of course, if they're counterfeit drugs, they can sell them for less. And the Canadian Secretary of Health also does not want to be the pharmaceutical supplier to the United States. They have a little different system up there, and it's a way of driving prices down. It's something that we wouldn't stand for in the United States. It's a mechanism whereby they have to bid on the drugs. So if there are 3 people that make heart medicines, the 3 have to bid against each other, even though the 3 do something slightly different, and your doctor might prefer one of the ones that don't win the bid. But That's how they drive the price down, and it's probably something that we wouldn't allow in the United States. I ask my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona is recognized.
Mr. President, I'd like to speak briefly about two of the amendments we're going to be voting on later. First is the Bingaman Amendment, and I urge my colleagues to oppose the Bingaman Amendment. It ignores fundamental economic realities of pharmaceutical patent litigation, and it would ultimately result in fewer generic drugs being brought to the market and delays in the launch of many of the generic drugs that do go to the market. Under current law, a generic drug company that is the first to file an abbreviated new drug application, that's the application they file for an existing patented drug, is entitled to 180 days of market exclusivity once the generic drug is approved. In other words, they have the exclusive market on it for half of the year. This creates a powerful incentive for drug companies to bring generic drugs to the market. The present amendment would dilute this right of 120 days of exclusivity and would potentially require the exclusivity period to be shared with another drug company's product. Under the amendment, the only way a generic drug company that files the first ANDA could be assured of getting its 180 days of exclusivity is by litigating a challenge to the validity of the branded drug's patent all the way to final judgment. This is not a sound approach. First of all, patent litigation is very expensive. Full litigation of a drug patent suit typically costs between $3 and $5 million. And second, most drug patents are ultimately found by the courts to be not invalid. That is, most validity challenges to these patents fail. Generic drug companies, like everyone else, have limited litigation budgets. As a practical matter, if we force them to litigate every patent case to a final judgment in order to preserve their exclusivity rights, they will pursue fewer abbreviated new drug applications. And fewer ANDAs mean fewer generic drugs and higher costs for consumers. Finally, it's often the case that partway into a drug patent lawsuit, the generic drug company comes to the conclusion that the brand's patent is strong and that the challenge to the patent is likely to lose. In such a situation, everyone is better off if the suit is settled. Typically, such settlements allow the generic drug to go to market somewhat earlier, but still preserve the bulk of the patent term. Obviously, if the generic drug company is forced to litigate the suit all the way to judgment, just in order to potentially receive their exclusivity, and they lose, the full patent term will run, there will be no early generic market entry. This hurts both the generic drug companies and, more importantly, the consumers. So for these reasons, I urge my colleagues to oppose the Bingaman Amendment. Secondly, Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to oppose the Sanders Amendment. This amendment would undermine the government's ability to fight fraud and harm patients and U.S. competitiveness by eviscerating existing incentives to invest in medical innovation. The Sanders Amendment would result in the automatic revocation of any remaining regulatory exclusivity on a product when a company is convicted of or even enters into a settlement agreement for certain violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act or any violations of the False Claim Act or several other listed statutes. And there are several reasons why I think this is the wrong approach. First, the amendment will result in less life-saving drugs ever getting to patients. Obviously, we should be fighting for life-saving drugs getting to patients even faster. We provide these periods for exclusivity, as I mentioned earlier, for a reason, to enable companies to recoup the significant investments that they make, as high as over $1 billion, $1.2 billion per drug, to develop new medicines. Some of the exclusivities that the amendment would revoke are those we enacted to encourage companies to ensure the safe use of pharmaceuticals in children or to find cure for rare diseases that affect a very small number of people. Indeed, orphan drug exclusivity is a great example of how these exclusivity periods benefit patients. Since 1983, the year on the Orphan Drug Act, that act was signed into law, more than 350 medicines have been approved to treat rare diseases, compared to fewer than 10 in the 1970s. Why would we want to jeopardize such a great success story? Second, reduced investment in U.S. drug development is not only bad news for patients, it's bad news for the economy, because the amendment, the Sanders Amendment, would create a disincentive to invest in drug development The National Venture Capital Association has already expressed concerns, stating, and I quote, "The amendment has the potential to inadvertently undermine innovation and undermine decades of policies enacted by Congress with the goal of fostering medical innovation," end of quotation. Defined periods of exclusivity provide some small measure of predictability in what is otherwise a very unpredictable and risky process, and companies and venture capitalists rely on these periods of exclusivity to make development and investment decisions. By threatening the elimination of exclusivities for a product that's likely many years removed from the development process, the Sanders Amendment would introduce even greater uncertainty into the R&D process. Let me restate. We need to reconsider the overall favorability of the environment for innovation in the United States, and yet here we are considering an amendment that, if enacted, would make the U.S. climate far less attractive for these companies, even as other companies are actively courting the biopharmaceutical industry. Third, while the amendment purports to fight fraud, in reality it would undermine the ability of the government to fight fraud by undermining its ability to settle cases. The Sanders Amendment would revoke exclusivity not only upon conviction, even if it's later overturned on appeal, but also on settlement. And this is a huge problem because it creates a disincentive for a company to ever settle, as it would make more sense to drag out the district court litigation while any relevant exclusivity period is still running for the company. Fourth and finally, the amendment is not actually even necessary because the outcome called for by the Sanders Amendment can already be achieved under current law in appropriate cases, because the government can and it does have the power to negotiate the relinquishment of exclusivity as a condition to settlement. So it can already do this. For example, just this past January, the Department of Justice negotiated the relinquishment of a company's 180-day exclusivity as part of a settlement for violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So mandating this kind of outcome undermines the government's ability to use it as leverage to negotiate settlements. Large penalties already apply for violations of the statutes. The world of drug manufacturing and marketing is very heavily regulated. Noncompliance is subject to considerable penalties under current law. So this amendment is not necessary. And rather than being outraged by settlements that actually occur, perhaps we'd ought to take them as an indicator that the government's doing a good job of using its existing authority to go after those who seek to defraud the health care system. For all of these reasons, I urge my colleagues to also oppose the Sanders Amendment.
President?
Senator from Maine is
Yes,
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to rise today to speak in support of the amendment that's been offered by the senator from Arizona. But before I do, I just want to recognize and acknowledge the tremendous and outstanding, remarkable work that was done by the crew at Kittery-Portsmouth Naval Shipyard and the local firefighters from numerous departments, both in the state of Maine as well as in the state of New Hampshire, because of a fire that occurred on a nuclear-powered submarine at the shipyard last evening that was burning for more than 9 hours. And it was extraordinary teamwork and coordination among all of the crews, as well as the firefighting, so many firefighters and departments with both states that managed to put the fire out is now is smoldering. Several of the firefighters were injured, but I just want to offer my commendations and congratulations to those crews for doing such exceptional and outstanding work, which is exemplifies the kind of teamwork that already occurs at that shipyard. So, Mr. President, I did want to offer my recognition to that extraordinary work in a very difficult circumstance. Mr. President, I rise today in support of the amendment that's been offered by the senator from Arizona, Senator McCain, in authorizing a very limited drug importation program whereby Americans can purchase medications from accredited online Canadian pharmacies. I'm supporting this amendment, as I have in the past. In fact, we've had broader amendments offered here on the floor of the Senate for almost more than a decade with respect to allowing importation of prescriptions from other countries that offer more competitive prices. I want to applaud Senator McCain, who's obviously been a valuable ally in this effort for many years, but he has proposed a very limited approach to address those who have concerns with the idea of importing prescription drugs. I, for one, cannot understand why there are such fundamental concerns about this issue, because, first of all, Americans are facing tremendous increases in prescription drug prices for far too long, and I think it's at a point in which Congress should address this issue, and precisely on this particular piece of legislation that is before us today. It couldn't be more appropriate to have this amendment offered to this legislation. In 2010, AARP found that retail prices for the most popular brand name drugs increased 41.5%, while the Consumer Price Index rose just 13%. In other words, the cost of prescription drugs rose more than 3 times as much as the inflation rate. That's completely unacceptable, Mr. President. And what has occurred as a result of this trend? Well, first of all, American consumers are increasingly choosing to risk living without taking critical medications. According to the Commonwealth Fund in 2010, 48 million Americans did not fill a prescription due to high costs. That represents an increase of 66% since 2001. Well, if the Senate and the overall Congress were to adopt the McCain Amendment, it would allow Americans to purchase safe medications at a lower price than they're available for us here in this country. We could begin to turn this disturbing trend around. I know that people in Maine deserve access to more affordable drug prices, Mr. President. Millions of Americans, and certainly Mainers, have already purchased drugs from Canada safely at a significant savings over the years. They've had to go to great lengths in order to purchase those lower-priced medications. They've taken bus trips after bus trips to Canada to purchase that medication because that was the only way they're going to have access to the prescriptions that they so desperately need. The McCain Amendment builds on that foundation. If you look at this first chart, Mr. President, in an April 27, 2012 survey comparing average Canadian drug prices against major U.S. retail pharmacy prices, we find that the average U.S. price for a 90-day supply of Nexium, which is a common blood thinner, is $560 in America, but only $265 in Canada. So Americans are paying twice as much for Nexium as Canadians do. Well, I think that that's simply outrageous, Mr. President. Why should American consumers pay twice as much for a medication that so many Americans depend on? And here's another example of a drug that is a blood-thinning drug that is also very crucial in this process, and that's Plavix. That costs $585 in the United States versus $398 in Canada for a 90-day supply. So, again, American consumers are paying 50% higher costs for the same prescription drugs than Canadians do. Then you look at the very popular anti-cholesterol medication Lipitor. And as this chart illustrates, again, Lipitor costs the American consumer $478 in the United States compared to $278 in Canada for a 90-day supply. So for patients who are already trying to make ends meet in this very difficult economy, they're rationing their medications, they're splitting their pills, or even skipping medications entirely. Why would we deny them access to safe drug products at these dramatically lower prices? And that's why I've co-sponsored Senator McCain's amendment, because it would allow Americans to import medications from accredited Canadian pharmacies from a list approved by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. These accredited pharmacies must commit to ongoing quality assurance programs and product testing to determine the safety and efficacy of these products. And this amendment is more narrowly focused than even the one that former colleague Senator Dorgan and I had offered previously. So this provides a pathway to a more limited approach for Americans to access affordable medications. In fact, there's been a very recent study, Mr. President, that was conducted by Roger Bate of the American Enterprise Institute entitled Unveiling the Mystery of Online Pharmacies, an audit study. And what he discovered is, and I quote, that if some foreign websites sell safe prescription drugs with substantial price discounts, but American consumers are guided to buy from U.S. websites only, the FDA could potentially discourage price competition between the U.S. and foreign pharmacies, and thereby reducing drug affordability within the United States. The danger of reducing price competition depends on whether consumers can distinguish trustworthy websites from the vast pool of foreign websites, end quote. So here we have the documentation by a very significant study that talks about how Americans can access these affordable medications. We shouldn't be discouraging price competition, as this study illustrates. And that's one of the points that I have been arguing over the years, that the real problem in this country with respect to prices for prescriptions is that we don't have competition within the industry and competition for those medications. And Americans have learned that citizens in other countries use the very same medications as we do. They're made in the very same plants, and yet they pay less. We talk about the competition, injecting free market competition in the healthcare marketplace as a way of achieving greater affordability, and therefore this amendment attempts to address that very issue. As we look at what other countries do, Mr. President, when we're talking about accessing, cheaper medications, we know in Canada that is the case. Well, it's certainly true in other industrialized nations, I should add. In fact, they pay 35 to 55% less for their drugs because of our higher prices Americans pay, which is about $90 billion more for the prescription drugs every year than we would otherwise, which is, I think, totally unacceptable, Mr. President. Why should American consumers be paying 35 to 55% more, or nearly $90 billion more, than consumers in other countries for the very same medications? It simply doesn't make sense. According to a former Pfizer CEO, Hank McKinnell, in this chart, and I quote, "Competition is good medicine for economies. Name an industry in which competition is allowed to flourish: computers, telecommunications, small package shipping, retailing, entertainment, and I'll show you lower prices, higher quality, more innovation, and better customer service. There's nary an exception." Okay, there's one. So far, the healthcare industry seems immune to the discipline of competition, end quote. When we last considered the legislation that I introduced along with former colleague Senator Dorgan, we allowed importation only from Canada, the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. And the Congressional Budget Office estimated that the federal government would save almost $20 billion, $20 billion if we allowed the importation of those medications. So we know for a fact that allowing drug importations generates considerable cost savings to the government, to individuals and businesses that provide health insurance coverage to their employees. The bottom line is, when nations institute safe, regulated trade in pharmaceuticals, they achieve results. When Sweden entered the European system of trade, saw a reduction of 12 to 19% in the price of traded drugs. In fact, Europe has had parallel trading for more than 30 years and has never had an incident. Industry sees advantages in being part of the global market when it comes to manufacturing costs. For example, according to a Pew study in 2011, the number of prescription drugs made at non-U.S. sites doubled between 2001 and 2008. That means they doubled at a sizable increase, Mr. President, with respect to the number of prescription drugs that are made at non-U.S. sites. That means there are more than 50 plants where our medications are manufactured, Mr. President, and not all of those facilities are even inspected. Not even inspected. And yet those are the medications that we use here in this country because they're manufactured in other plants in other countries. In fact, as I said, there are more than 50 countries in which we have our prescriptions manufactured. So, let me see if I have this straight. It's fine for some foreign countries to manufacture drugs in their own plants for the U.S. market, ship those drugs here, where the American people are given the privilege of paying higher prices than anywhere else in the world, but somehow we can't safely import those very drugs into the United States directly. It simply doesn't make sense, Mr. President, because the American taxpayer is underwriting more than $30 billion of research, basic and applied research at the National Institutes of Health alone. So other consumers in all of those other nations are benefiting from the investments the American taxpayer is making with respect to research that produces these medications and these prescriptions. They pay 35 to 55% less than the American consumer, and yet the American taxpayer is paying more for those drugs, as I said, and also paying more in their tax dollars for the research that is ongoing at the National Institutes of Health. It simply doesn't make sense. With all the additional profit, industry invests nearly equally R&D in the U.S. and in Europe, and is increasingly moving research to low-cost Asian countries. So paying the world's highest prices for drugs doesn't ensure us more research, but it decreases our access to drugs, Mr. President. So that's the contradiction that Americans confront each and every day when they're purchasing their medications at a much higher cost than consumers in other countries. And yet the amendment that's offered by the senator from Arizona is allowing importation solely from Canada, and it's on online pharmacies based on a list that has been drafted by the Department of Health and Human Services. That is a very prescribed, targeted, limited approach to allow American consumers to benefit from those lower-priced drugs that are offered in Canada. It's very important, Mr. President, that we take this step. It's important for American consumers who otherwise are not going to be able to afford these medications when they're paying 2 to 3 times more than their counterparts in Canada, for example, that the prices are rising 5 times more than the inflation rate year after year, so the compounding effect is significant and overwhelming for most American consumers and families. So what I would hope, Mr. President, that we would support the amendment that's been offered by Senator McCain. Now, some have suggested here today that providing support for the McCain amendment will hinder efforts to quickly move on the underlying legislation for the FDA. That concern is certainly not persuasive because the McCain amendment is a very narrowly focused approach. It represents a good faith effort to find common ground. It has included strong safety-related measures, and it's done under very limited circumstances in which the American consumer can take advantage of the lower prices that have been demonstrated here today with some of the commonly used drugs such as the cholesterol or Lipitor or blood-thinning drugs like Plavix. It's explicitly designed to make it more broadly acceptable for those who might have concerns with taking the approach of drug importation. We must create, Mr. President, a more competitive, more affordable health care system for the American people. Prescription drug market needs competition. Competition will lower prices. And for some reason, even though we're underwriting all of the research that benefits consumers in so many other countries, and even though our medications are manufactured in other plants in 50 countries, American consumers are paying up to 55% more than their counterparts around the world. It simply doesn't make sense. Fact is, Mr. President, I would suggest it's outrageous. So that's why I'm supporting this amendment. We need to take this limited, modest first step that I think goes a long way to addressing any reservations anyone might have in this chamber with respect to the issue of importation. I hope that we would allow American consumers to benefit for much lower prices, and especially during these very difficult economic times. This is a first step towards a larger system of safe, regulated drug importation, and I want to commend the senator from Arizona for offering this amendment, and I hope that the Senate would adopt it. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa is recognized.
Mr. President, prior to Senator Bingaman bringing up his amendment, I ask unanimous consent that the following amendments be in order and made pending. Leahy number 2142 as modified with the changes that are at the desk. Portman number 2145 as modified with the changes that are at the desk. Portman number 2146 as modified with the changes that are at the desk.
Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from Iowa, Mr. Harkin, proposes amendments in block numbered 2142 as modified, 2145 as modified, and 2146 as modified.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the following pending amendments be agreed to. Leahy number 2142 as modified, Portman number 2145 as modified, and Coburn number 2131, and that the Coburn amendment number 2132 be withdrawn.
Is there objection? So ordered.
It is my understanding, Mr. President, we are ready to act on the Portman amendment number 2146 as modified.
Is there further debate on the amendment? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. The amendment as modified is agreed to.
Mr. President, I have 6 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and the requests be printed in the record.
No objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. The senior senator from New Mexico is recognized.
I thank the chair, Mr. President. I would at this point call up amendment number 2111 and ask that the reading of that amendment be dispensed with.
Clerk will report. The clerk will report the amendment by number.
The senator from New Mexico, Mr. Bingaman, for himself and others, proposes an amendment number 2111.
I'd ask that reading be dispensed with.
Objection, so ordered. Senator from Mexico.
Mr. President, this amendment is one, it's a bipartisan amendment. Senator Vitter is co-sponsoring this with me. Also Senators Franken and Shaheen and Cole and Tom Udall and Tim Johnson and Klobuchar and Merkley and Sanders and the presiding officer, Senator Brown. This amendment addresses the very same issue that the senator from Maine was talking about, and that is how do we bring down the price of prescription drugs? How do we get competition into the market for prescription drugs? We have a circumstance today which an anti-competitive, anti-consumer practice is engaged in, and our amendment will change the law so that that practice can no longer be engaged in. Now, the practice I'm talking about is the entering into so-called pay-for-delay settlements between brand-name drugs, brand-name pharmaceutical companies, and generic manufacturers that have the effect, these pay-for-delay settlements have the effect of delaying timely access to generic drugs. These agreements between these companies shield billions of dollars in sales each year from effective competition. The pharmaceutical companies benefit from this lack of competition, and they do so at the expense of consumers. They do so at the expense of the federal government, since the federal government is a very large consumer and purchases a substantial amount of prescription drugs for the military and in other ways. A preliminary estimate from the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, indicates that this amendment will reduce direct spending by hundreds of millions of dollars at a minimum. Frankly, I believe that it will in fact save us billions of dollars annually at the federal government level. But the CBO also indicates that the amendment will reduce the average cost for prescription drugs and lower the cost of health insurance plans. Early access to generic drugs is a key to saving money in the health care system. The Kaiser Family Foundation has found this. They concluded that spending in the U.S. for prescription drugs reached $259.1 billion in 2010. That is nearly 6 times as much as we spent on prescription drugs in 1990. Since generic drugs are on average 4 times less expensive, or another way to put that is are a quarter the cost of the brand name alternatives, they can be a very important source for reducing the cost in our health care system. To actually receive these savings, consumers have to have access to these generic drugs and have access to them in a timely manner. In 1984, Congress passed the bipartisan Hatch-Waxman Act to create market-based incentives for generic pharmaceutical companies to bring their drugs to market as quickly as possible. The purpose of the law was to incentivize the early generic drug competition while preserving incentives for pioneer companies to develop innovative new medicines. Unfortunately, pay-for-delay settlements between brand-name drugs that already have their products in the market and generic pharmaceutical manufacturers who have not yet brought their products to market have become commonplace. And these agreements, these so-called settlements, have stifled competition and delayed access to generic drugs at a significant cost to everyone who's involved in the health care system. There's a table here I want to put up, and it relates to 3 particular drugs, and I'll talk about the second 2 of these drugs because this gives some context in what I'm concerned about here. This second drug, Lipitor, everybody knows about Lipitor. It's a cholesterol-lowering drug. It's familiar to most people. It is the best-selling pharmaceutical ever in the history of the world. According to a 2008 New York Times report, a pay-for-delay settlement delayed generic entry into that market, or the entry of a generic version of Lipitor, by 20 months. The same report stated that the generic version of the drug was estimated to sell for less than 1/3 the cost of the brand name Lipitor. And it pointed out that the brand-named Lipitor had earned $12.7 billion in sales a year before. According to a letter sent to the FDA Director Hamburg last year from some of my colleagues in the Senate, indicating that the federal government was spending $2.4 billion a year on Lipitor. They estimated that bringing a generic version to market would generate somewhere between $4 and $6.7 billion in savings annually to people who are purchasing this drug in this country. Second example is Provigil. This is a sleep disorder drug, and due to the pay-for-delay settlement entered into there, a generic version of Provigil just came to market this year. Had this amendment that we are offering as part of this bill been law, generics very likely would have entered the market 6 years ago with the expiration of exclusivity. The chief executive officer of Cephalon, which is the brand-named manufacturer of Provigil, is quoted as saying, quote, "We were able to get 6 more years of patent protection. That's $4 billion in sales that no one expected," end quote. In other words, the Provigil case represents 6 years and tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of lost savings to consumers, one of the largest consumers, the largest consumer being the U.S. government and particularly the U.S. military. And I have a chart here that relates to the U.S. military's potential savings from this amendment. This illustrates, translates this into dollars that are being paid out by the U.S. military as part of the defense budget, which we're going to be passing later this year. Assuming that a generic version of Provigil would have been released in 2006, the Department of Defense alone would have saved $159 million from this one drug between 2006 and 2011. That's over $150 million from a single prescription drug. Mr. President and colleagues, if enacted, this amendment would foster more generic competition, would bring generic drugs to the market sooner, and would do so in a manner that's consistent with the original intent of the Hatch-Waxman Act. Passage of the amendment would significantly cut prescription drug costs for American consumers and help reduce the federal deficit. Let me just also allude to an article that I saw today on the front page of the New York Times, and I know some of my colleagues take exception to the New York Times occasionally, but this is an article entitled "New Fervor for Cutting Costs Among Hospitals and Insurers." And the reporter who did this article is Reed Abelson. About 3 paragraphs into the article, he states, "After years of self-acknowledged profligacy, hospitals, doctors, and health insurers say there is a strong effort underway to bring medical costs under control." I was struck by that phrase, self-acknowledged profligacy in the health care system, Mr. President. I think that's what we have engaged in here in the Congress, frankly, is self-acknowledged profligacy in the health care system. This amendment will help to correct that. The amendment has the strong support of the AARP, of Families USA, of the Consumer Federation of America, of U.S. PIRG, of Consumers Union, the Center for Medicare Advocacy, of the AFL-CIO, AFSCME, Walmart, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, among other groups and organizations. So, Mr. President, if my colleagues favor competition, this amendment helps to promote competition. If you want to see reduced costs to the taxpayer for health care, then this amendment helps to reduce the cost to the taxpayer. If you want to reduce what patients and hospitals and insurance companies have to pay for prescription drugs, this amendment helps to do that as well. Mr. President, I think this is something that it's long past time we corrected this problem. This is a great opportunity for us to do so. I believe it's one of the first amendments that will be considered on this legislation. I hope my colleagues will put aside whatever other considerations they might have had in the past and go ahead and vote for this correction in federal law. This is a problem, frankly, that we passed legislation that provided the opportunity. Unfortunately, it was not intended, but an unintended consequence of the earlier legislation that we passed, the Hatch-Waxman Act, was to allow this kind of blocking, these kinds of pay-for-delay settlements to be entered into. We can correct that today. I hope very much we will. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Am I?
On whose time is the senator speaking?
Yes.
Speaking on the majority's time. I believe I have time at
On the Bingaman Amendment? On the Bingaman Amendment?
No. I'm speaking off the McCain Amendment.
The senior senator from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to speak for a brief moment on the Amendment 2146 and then on a different issue, which is the reaction of some to the proposal Senator Casey and I made about Eduardo Saverin and others who renounced their citizenship for tax purposes. First, on 2146, I'm glad that this amendment has now finally passed the Senate. It places synthetic drugs on Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act as totally banned substances where they belong. These synthetic substances are also known as bath salts, or in the case of synthetic marijuana, spice or incense. Synthetic drugs aren't sold on street corners by slingers who keep hidden stashes. Instead, these drugs are legal, even though they're dangerous, and can be found in local corner stores across the country. They are as easy to buy as a lollipop or a carton of milk, but far more dangerous, even more dangerous than the common illegal drug on which they are based. By passing this amendment today, we finally get these poisonous drugs off our shelves and keep our nation's youth out of emergency rooms. I want to thank Senators Klobuchar and Grassley for working with me on this amendment, as well as Chairman Harkin and Senator Enzi, Chairman Leahy, Senator Grassley, and Senator Feinstein for their leadership. And I want to thank Senator Harkin and Enzi particularly for getting us in this package, and Senator Portman for working with us on this amendment. Now on the issue of Eduardo Saverin. Last week, Senator Casey and I introduced the Expatriate Bill. It is a bill that makes sure that people that renounce their citizenship for tax purposes don't escape what they owe and can't come back without repaying all they avoided paying this great country. It's a modest proposal made in response to the regrettable effort by a person named Eduardo Saverin, who renounced his American citizenship to avoid paying even the historically low level of 15% on capital gains for the several billions in windfall profit he is set to receive from the Facebook IPO. Now, Mr. Saverin is no longer involved in the day-to-day running of the company, and it bears mentioning that the current active leadership of Facebook is comprised of responsible corporate citizens who meet all their responsibilities and obligations and proudly maintain their American citizenship. Mr. Saverin, on the other hand, has chosen to disown the United States to save some money on his taxes. Senator Casey and I have proposed a response. Our bill would bar Saverin and others like him from re-entering the country. It would also reimpose taxes on investment income earned in the United States, even if an expatriate is living abroad. Now, I believe the vast majority of Americans of all parties and persuasions think that renouncing citizenship in America to avoid taxes is troubling, unwarranted, ungrateful. It is upsetting, to say the least, that when a person who has benefited so thoroughly from being an American a person who accessed and enjoyed so many exceptional aspects of American society just takes the money and runs, rather than doing the right thing and repaying a debt to a nation that nurtured, facilitated, and cheered his success. And I think the vast majority of Americans are receptive to suggestions for how we can address this kind of unacceptable behavior. Look, nobody enjoys paying taxes, but Americans know that we wouldn't have a functioning society without them. We argue and debate about how the proper rates should be, what is fair, what level will sustain and grow our economy and our middle class. But I think that most Americans, Mr. President, agree that paying a mere 15% in capital gains taxes on a sum of $3 or $4 billion is not too much to ask a person, especially a person who fled their own homeland because their native society could not provide a reasonable level of security to their family. While the real point here is not just about this one case, our bill addresses a small group of evaders over the last decade or so, it is worth pointing out that in this particular case, the Savran family found security here, thanks to taxpayer-funded cops, and stability, thanks to a taxpayer-funded military, and a world-class university system like that at Harvard, again underpinned by public support. And they also found an expansive middle class that would become the market for his product and a dynamic entrepreneurial free market economy that allows for significant accumulation of wealth and functioning capital markets that were recently saved from the brink of catastrophic collapse through who? The American taxpayer. And they found a government that invests in research and development and things like creating the Internet and the web and GPS and microprocessors, all of which were necessary precursors to what Savran and his cohorts created via Facebook. And let's not forget a non-corrupt legal system which decided a case in his favor that made him a billionaire. Yes, Eduardo Savran did very well by being an American. And I think that most Americans know full well what he accomplished was not done in a vacuum, that his success is the outgrowth of his participation in an extraordinary American society, a society we collectively support. No one gets rich in America on their own, and when people do well in America, they should do well by America. I believe the vast majority of Americans believe this too. So when I introduced our legislation, I was sure it would garner wide and deep support, and in general it has. That is why it is so baffling that the extreme right-wing Republicans, people like Grover Norquist, the de facto leader of the Republican Party on tax matters, would rush to the defense of a man who is turning his back on America by dodging taxes. Amazingly, the extreme right-wing echo chamber has made Savran into a cause célèbre, defending his decision to disown the country as somehow heroic. Their words, not mine. I was amazed, just amazed, day after day, the right-wing blogs pouring forth praise of Savran, a man who renounced his citizenship after doing so well by America. I took it that as a given that citizenship and all that it implies in terms of loyalty and duty to America was axiomatic. But unfortunately and sadly, Mr. President, that is no longer the case. Here is just some of what was said. Forbes said that, quote, for defriending the U.S., Facebook's Eduardo Savran is an American hero. Can you believe it? An American hero? Renouncing your citizenship now qualifies as heroic for the hard right wing? George Washington was heroic. Rosa Parks was heroic. John McCain and Gabby Giffords are heroic. Navy SEALs are heroic. I would tell Forbes magazine and the right wing, Eduardo Savran is not heroic. National Review's Mario Loyola says it is the foolish and counterproductive tax policies of the left that are chasing Eduardo Savran to another country. I'm sorry, what tax did he move to escape? A 15% rate on capital gains on several billion dollars. Is that so onerous that it's chasing him away? I'm sure any American worker would love to have the 15% rate. And if 15% is too high, what does Mr. Loyola or Mr. Norquist think the proper capital gains rate should be? Do they think we should have even a lower rate on capital gains, which disproportionately goes to the highest income earners? What is the proper rate, Mr. Norquist, if Mr. Saverin's a hero for escaping the 15%? Should we make it 10%? Should we make it 5%? Should we make it 0? Well, they won't say, because if they did, they'd be laughed out of town. The Wall Street Journal says we are oppressive and demagogic. No, in America you're free to leave. But if you leave to purposely avoid paying your fair share, then we will attach a consequence to that dodge. Right-wing blog after right-wing blog, from the American Thinker to the Daily Caller, echoes that punishing Saverin for tax dodging is un-American. Really? Silly me. I thought renouncing one's citizenship was un-American. While on the right-wing radio they ask, if it's a more favorable tax haven than you can find elsewhere, why is it automatic you're unpatriotic? Why is it automatic that you're a coward? Because, my fellow Americans, when you renounce your nation to fatten your bank account, you are, by definition, being greedy and unpatriotic. Grover Norquist says our bill is like fascist Nazi Germany, or apartheid South Africa, or communist Soviet Union. While in American Thinker we are being accused of erecting a Berlin Wall. In the Examiner they say we are totalitarian. These comparisons are absurd on their face and border on the odious. The law Mr. Norquist references in Nazi Germany was purely discriminatory. It targeted a particular race of people, the Jewish people, and punished them for nothing other than being Jewish and exercised freedom of movement. It was meant to constrain that freedom by forcing Jews to reside inside Germany. Our proposal targets no single race, creed, or class. It doesn't punish you for factors beyond your control like who your parents were. It applies based on actions you take, namely disowning the United States to avoid taxes. Our law is not triggered by a wish to travel beyond America's borders or even reside permanently in a foreign country. It's the act of renouncing one's U.S. citizenship for the purpose of avoiding taxes that triggers our bill. Another right-wing opinion piece asks, if you leave to protest heavy taxation, why must you pay a penalty? I'm sorry, gentlemen. Mr. Saverin is not protesting anything. If he was protesting, he'd stay here and fight for a lower rate, not simply exempt himself and leave others like him to continue paying a rate he considers too high. What he's doing is free-riding on America, dodging paying his fair share, and pocketing the billions from an IPO. Yet another right-wing blog says we're engaged in, quote, class warfare to vilify people that create wealth, just like the Nazis did with the Jews. Well, Mr. President, I know a thing or two about what Nazis did. Some of my relatives were killed by them. And saying that a person who made their fortune specifically because of the positive elements in American society in turn has a responsibility to do right by America is not even on the same planet as comparing to what the Nazis did to the Jews. The comparison is odious, but it's in a bunch of these right-wing blogs. It goes on and on. The whole torrent of vitriol is absurd, just absurd. Mr. Saverin is, in essence, an economic tax dodger. And once upon a time, the right-wing castigated draft dodgers for failing to heed their nation's call. Those who fled the country were vilified as cowards, as self-absorbed traitors. Yet in this case, the same exact kind of unpatriotic, un-American behavior is actually being defended by the right wing. It's off the deep end. And when a view this irrational has overtaken one end of the political spectrum, it has serious, negative consequences for our ability to solve our nation's problems. If those on the other side of the negotiating table are this obsessive on taxes that they consider their minimization a higher priority than preserving our national identity, then it's no wonder a grand bargain on taxes and spending has been so out of reach. In the last several years, the far right has disregarded one historically conservative priority after another in favor of an all-consuming obsession with protecting low taxes for the wealthiest Americans. First, it was the deficit. The Republicans have for years claimed that deficit reduction was their top priority, but that has since been exposed as a myth. Every independent economist will tell you that the deficit problem cannot be solved except through both spending cuts and revenue increases. It is, in fact, preserving tax cuts for the very wealthy is counterproductive to reducing annual deficits. Yet the far right marches on in defense of tax cuts for millionaires, deficit be damned. Last August, our nation's creditworthiness became a second casualty of the far right's insistence on low taxes for the wealthy. The right wing was so dug in against any reasonable fiscal compromise, they forced a manufactured crisis over raising the nation's debt ceiling. This caused the first ever downgrade of our nation's credit rating. Unbelievably, the far right prioritized millionaire tax breaks over the nation's full faith in credit. Despite that unreasonableness, we thought we had finally figured out a way to force the far right to come to grips with the need to deal with revenues. We came up with a mechanism called the sequester that would trigger harsh defense cuts if the other side continued to refuse any new revenues. Surely, if there's one thing conservatives prized as much as tax cuts, it was defense spending, right? Wrong. As we speak, the far right remains unwilling to cede an inch on revenues, no matter what it means for the Pentagon. The deficit, the nation's creditworthiness, our national security, all of these things have taken a back seat to the far right's idolatry on taxes. And now this has gone so far, this idolatry they have taken to such an extreme end, they make Eduardo Saverin into their patron saint. In the name of low taxes for the wealthy, they have lionized an inherently unpatriotic person. The hero worship of Saverin is Norquist's extreme right-wing anti-tax agenda being carried to its logical but irrational conclusion. And it is scary. It's a scary, absurd place where even a tax dodger who renounces America for his own 30 pieces of silver is celebrated as a patriot and an American hero. It is perverse. Reasonable Republicans rightly seem wary to embrace taking things this far. House Speaker John Boehner labeled Saverin's move absolutely outrageous, said he would support legislation to stop wealthy expats relocating to avoid taxes. Others have been quiet, perhaps cowed by fears of being the next target of the right-wing echo chamber. But shouldn't loyalty to America and the broader responsibilities and duties of citizenship trump base, non-essential financial interest? Sadly, the answer of some on the extreme right is no. The Wall Street Journal attacked the thrust of our proposed legislation as an example of the age of envy. Well, it's not envy. I, in fact, am happy that those who invented and perfected and invested in Facebook got rich. Having an idea, succeeding, and maybe getting rich off this great idea is the American way. More power to them. However, what is not the American way is taking a free ride on all the exceptional aspects of American society. What is not the American way is deriving massive advantage from various publicly supported elements of that society and then skipping town when you hit the jackpot. Yes, you're free to leave. You have a right to be selfish, even greedy, and renounce this nation. I understand this will make you more money and that there is a rational, if simplistic, economic argument to be made in favor of doing it if the only factor that mattered was always getting richer and all other values were irrelevant. But we Americans have other values, too. America is special for many reasons. It's secure. It offers freedom of expression. It's diverse and tolerant. It's entrepreneurial. It's economically and culturally dynamic. Looking out for the common good is in our blood. It's a part of our shared history and the vision of our founding fathers. We provide for the common defense. We promote the general welfare, and we are not just out for ourselves. No, we look to secure the blessings of liberty, not just for ourselves, but for our posterity. And it is this, and so much more, that makes America an exceptional society. Mr. President, I am really appalled by the reaction. Not appalled by a debate on tax policy. I'm appalled by making heroic a man who renounces citizenship to escape a tax rate, capital gains, of 15%. And too often, I think that every action and dilemma we face is now reduced to a question of whether this means bigger government or smaller government. And since those on the extreme right believe we must have smaller government at all costs, they vehemently oppose all taxes. But sometimes, as with this case and others like it, it is not just about the size of government. It's about doing what's fair and right and just based on your responsibilities of a citizen. Citizenship is not simply business decision. It is not just a transaction. Those on the right, like Grover Norquist, defending this economic draft dodger, are saying something very different. They are saying that the social contract somehow excludes the accumulation of money. We know that we give up certain rights and freedoms to live in a place like America, but we can't just carry out vigilantism to pursue justice. So, in conclusion, Mr. President, being an American is not a one-way street. There are enormous benefits to being a citizen of our nation and a member of the amazing society that spawned. But there are also responsibilities and duties, like patriotism, service, contributing your fair share, commitment to community and family. As we approach critical debates on the matters of taxation and fairness and job creation, so critical to keeping America the greatest nation on the face of the earth, I certainly hope that it is these values, not glorified self-interest, that drowns out all other values that guide our actions. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senior senator from Wyoming is recognized.
While I agree with much of what the senator from New York had to say, I hope this